When my boss and her lawyer asked for a private word, I didn't expect the conversation to make my heart race or blur the lines I thought were so clear. The morning had begun like any other. The steady hum of fluorescent lights, the faint clatter of keyboards, and the quiet murmur of colleagues settling into their routines. I was halfway through answering emails when my phone buzzed, pulling me out of my small comfort zone. It was a message from my boss. "Can you come to my office? The lawyer and I need to speak with you privately." A strange flutter of anticipation and unease hit me all at once. The words were simple, professional, but something about the phrasing, "privately," made my pulse quicken. I tried to push the thought aside, reminding myself that nothing unusual had happened in the office, and yet, as I walked down the familiar corridor, the air felt thicker, charged with an invisible tension. When I arrived, the door was slightly ajar. I could see her seated behind the large, polished desk, exuding that calm authority she always carried. She looked up as I entered, and I noticed something that made my stomach tighten, a subtle softness in her gaze, a fleeting hint of vulnerability hidden behind her poised demeanor. Her lawyer, standing discreetly to the side, gave a curt nod in my direction. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice warm yet professional, each word deliberate and smooth. I closed the door behind me, and the sudden quiet made me hyper-aware of every sound. The soft click of my shoes against the hardwood floor, the faint rustle of papers on her desk, the subtle creak of her chair as she leaned slightly forward. Something about the closeness of the room made the air feel intimate, almost personal. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, something floral, understated, lingering just long enough to make my senses take notice. She rested her hands lightly on the desk, one hand occasionally brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was small, effortless, but it struck me with unexpected force. As I stood there, unsure whether to sit or remain standing, my mind raced through possible scenarios. Was this about a project? A complaint? A promotion? Every possibility felt heavier than it should. And yet, amid the nervous anticipation, there was an undeniable pull, a quiet curiosity to understand the woman who had always been a figure of authority to me, now sharing a moment that felt different. Her lawyer began to speak, formal and precise, outlining the purpose of the meeting in clear, professional terms. But my attention kept drifting back to her. The way she tilted her head slightly when listening, the way her fingers tapped gently on the desk, there was a grace in these small movements, a quiet command of the space that made it impossible to look away. And then, the door clicked shut behind me. The finality of it, the sense that the world outside no longer existed for this brief moment, made my heart skip a beat. I was alone in the room with her, my boss, confident yet quietly vulnerable, and the lawyer, professional yet distant. The stage was set, tension lingering in the air like a soft current, ready to carry us into something I couldn't yet name. The moment the door closed behind me, the room seemed to shrink, the walls pulling in just enough to make the space feel intensely private. My boss sat back slightly in her chair, her posture relaxed yet deliberate, a subtle command of the room that made me acutely aware of my own stance. Her lawyer, standing a little off to the side, straightened his jacket and cleared his throat, beginning the formal portion of the meeting. I listened carefully, nodding, trying to follow the legal and professional details. But as the words reached me, my attention kept returning to her, to the way she leaned in ever so slightly when clarifying a point, as if every word she spoke carried a gravity beyond the practical. The soft rise and fall of her chest as she exhaled, the delicate movement of her fingers tracing the edge of a document, created a rhythm I couldn't ignore. Her voice, warm and even, carried an unusual gentleness that contrasted sharply with the lawyer's clipped, precise tone. I found myself tuning into the subtleties, the way her eyes held mine a fraction longer than necessary, the slight crease in her brow when she considered a question I asked. Each gesture was tiny, almost imperceptible, but it tugged at something inside me, stirring a quiet curiosity and attention I hadn't anticipated. At one point, she shifted in her seat, crossing one leg over the other. The motion was fluid, graceful, and yet there was a soft vulnerability in the way she settled back against the chair, a humanizing moment that made her feel closer, more real. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume again, a gentle, floral trace that seemed to linger even when she leaned back, embedding itself in my awareness. The lawyer spoke again, and I answered, trying to maintain professional composure. But every glance at her face, every subtle smile she allowed herself, distracted me. There was a quiet curiosity in her expression, a patience that invited trust, and it made my usual nervousness seem almost misplaced. Her presence was grounding, yet it stirred an unfamiliar energy in me, a mix of respect, admiration, and something more tentative, unspoken. At one point, our hands brushed briefly over a set of papers. The contact was fleeting, accidental in appearance, yet electric in sensation. The warmth of her fingers against mine lingered in my palm far longer than it should have. I caught myself stealing a glance at her, noticing how she looked at me, not just at the work, but at me, really looking. And for a fraction of a second, the formal boundaries of the room seemed to dissolve. The conversation continued, the lawyer maintaining his professional distance while she leaned forward, listening, guiding, connecting. And in those moments, I realized that this meeting was more than the formal matters at hand. It was a subtle, quiet test of connection, a dance of understanding and unspoken awareness. Each word, each gesture, each pause seemed to draw us closer, creating a space that was at once professional and deeply intimate. By the time the lawyer finished his explanation, I was acutely aware of the tension in the room, not conflict, but a slow, rising current of unspoken curiosity and emotional pull. And as she allowed a small, reassuring smile to brush her lips, I understood something I hadn't before. This meeting was not just about the matter at hand. It was about us, in a way neither of us could fully name yet. After the formalities of the meeting, the lawyer excused himself, leaving the room in a quiet hush that felt heavier than I expected. The sudden intimacy of being alone with her was almost tangible. The air seemed charged, and I noticed the subtle shift in her posture. The confident, commanding aura softened, just enough to reveal the woman beneath the professional exterior. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the desk. I could see a small crease of worry between her brows, a sign of concern she didn't bother to mask this time. Her voice, usually smooth and controlled, carried a hint of hesitation when she began to speak. "I wanted to be honest with you," she said, eyes meeting mine directly. "There's a situation I've been handling, and I need someone I trust to understand it, someone who can see beyond the surface." I felt a sudden rush of responsibility, mixed with something unexpected, a closeness that went beyond work. I nodded, unsure of what to say, my gaze caught in hers. It wasn't just a request for help. It was an invitation into her world, a fragile opening she didn't offer lightly. As she spoke, I noticed the subtle gestures that betrayed her calm exterior. A hand brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the faint tap of her fingers on the desk, the way she shifted her weight slightly forward, as if trying to bridge a distance. Each movement felt deliberate yet unconsciously intimate, a small but powerful signal of trust. I found myself leaning in slightly, drawn to her presence, aware of the warmth radiating from her hands and the quiet steadiness of her breathing. The room seemed to shrink around us, the outside world fading, leaving only this shared space. When she reached for a folder and handed it to me, our fingers brushed, just a fleeting touch, but enough to send an unexpected spark up my arm. My chest tightened, and I caught myself stealing a glance at her face. She met my eyes with a softness that almost disarmed me. For a moment, the conversation paused, and all I could hear was the faint hum of the office beyond the walls, the subtle rustle of paper, and the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat, somehow perceptible in the closeness of the room. The vulnerability she displayed, unspoken yet clear, made me aware of the depth behind her composed exterior. She wasn't just my boss. She was a person who carried burdens, fears, and an unspoken need for understanding. As I listened, offering small words of reassurance, I felt the tension between us shift. It was no longer just professional. It was human, intimate in a way that wasn't physical but deeply emotional. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, a quiet sigh escaping her lips, and for the first time, I sensed that she trusted me not only with the facts of a situation, but with the fragile layers of herself she didn't show anyone else. When the moment ended, and the folder rested between us. The air still seemed charged. We exchanged a lingering glance, one that carried unspoken acknowledgement, a quiet understanding that something had changed. In that room, in those few minutes, we had crossed a line from mere colleagues to something more nuanced, more profound. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that this was only the beginning of a slow, delicate dance neither of us fully understood yet. The days that followed felt different, though nothing about the office itself had changed. The hum of printers, the click of keyboards, the occasional murmur of conversations, all remained the same, yet I noticed details I hadn't before. Every time I passed her desk, the tilt of her head as she considered her screen, the way her fingers tapped thoughtfully against her keyboard, seemed more intimate somehow, more personal. It started with small, almost accidental touches. A brief brush of hands as we passed a stack of documents. The faint warmth lingering on my fingers long after the contact ended. Each instance was fleeting, seemingly insignificant, yet it left a subtle echo in my chest, a reminder that proximity carried weight beyond mere workspace etiquette. We began finding ourselves lingering in shared spaces, leaning over the same report, discussing a detail on a screen, sharing a coffee in the break room. These moments were ordinary, mundane even, yet they had an extraordinary clarity to them. I noticed the warmth in her smile when she explained a point, the way her laughter, soft and genuine, seemed to fill the space without effort. Her presence became a rhythm I unconsciously followed, a gentle undercurrent to my otherwise routine day. One afternoon, we were side by side, examining a particularly tedious set of reports. The office was quiet, only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of a few colleagues. I realized I was acutely aware of every small motion. The subtle way she leaned slightly toward me when pointing at a figure, the gentle shift of her hand resting near mine on the desk. Our fingers brushed ever so slightly, and I felt a warmth ripple up my arm, a tension that was as thrilling as it was impossible to name. I caught myself noticing other things, too. The faint scent of her perfume in the air as she leaned over, the light pressure of her shoulder as she adjusted her chair closer to mine, the quiet cadence of her voice as she read numbers aloud. Each sensation was a reminder that something was shifting between us, a tension that was neither inappropriate nor forced, but entirely organic. Later, as we walked back from the small kitchenette with our coffees, there was a moment when our shoulders brushed. A glance, a soft smile, a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken connection that had grown between us. It wasn't bold or dramatic, but it was enough. Enough to make me aware of her presence in a way I hadn't been before. Enough to make the ordinary feel electric. The day ended as it always did, but I couldn't shake the quiet awareness of her. Every shared glance, every accidental touch, every soft laugh became a thread weaving between us. The office was no longer just a workplace. It was a space charged with possibility, subtle tension, and a slow, deliberate intimacy. And while nothing had yet been spoken about feelings or attraction, the rhythm between us had shifted irrevocably. In those quiet moments, the boundaries of professional distance began to blur, replaced by a warm, fragile tension, a connection that neither of us yet fully understood, but one that both of us felt profoundly. It was a late afternoon when the office quieted to a near hush. Most colleagues had left, leaving only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint clatter of distant cleaning staff. I found myself standing near her desk, papers in hand, feeling an unusual tightness in my chest. The small, innocent moments we had shared over the past days, brushing hands, shared glances, lingering near one another, had begun to crystallize into something I couldn't ignore. And yet, there was hesitation, a careful line I felt compelled to honor. She looked up at me, her eyes soft but alert, as if she could sense the inner turmoil I hadn't yet voiced. "You seem distracted," she said quietly, her voice calm but carrying a subtle undertone of concern. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening slightly around the papers. I need to be honest," I began, and the words felt heavier than they should have. "I'm not sure how I should feel, or how I should act. Being around you, it's different. I can't stop noticing, well, everything." Her expression softened, a small, understanding smile curving her lips. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush me, but leaned back slightly in her chair, creating a space that felt safe yet intimate. The vulnerability in her posture was subtle, a tilt of her head, the brief pause as she considered her response, but it spoke volumes. "I understand," she said softly, her hand resting lightly on the desk, just inches from mine. The proximity alone made my pulse quicken. "It's complicated, isn't it? The difference in age, the professional boundaries, and yet, there's something here that feels real." The air between us seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken truths. I took a cautious step closer, careful not to overstep, feeling the warmth radiating from her presence. My fingers brushed against the edge of the desk near hers, an accidental contact that sent an unexpected ripple of awareness through me. I glanced at her hand, noticing the subtle grace in her movements, the quiet elegance in how she adjusted her posture. I don't want to do anything that would make things awkward," I admitted, my voice low. "But I also can't ignore what I feel. The way I notice you, the way it matters when you're near." Her gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability that went beyond professional decorum. She leaned slightly forward, a gentle, reassuring gesture. "You don't have to figure it all out at once," she said. "Sometimes, acknowledging the feeling is enough. And sometimes, that honesty is the first step to understanding each other better." The room seemed to shrink around us, the world outside fading. I could feel the subtle warmth of her presence, the quiet rhythm of her breathing, and the electric tension in the slight closeness of our bodies. Her eyes held mine with steady patience, and I realized that this moment, fragile, hesitant, and real, was a turning point. We didn't rush, we didn't force anything. Instead, we simply allowed ourselves to exist in the quiet space between words, acknowledging the tension, the hesitation, and the budding connection that neither of us could yet fully name. In that stillness, I felt the first real bridge between professional respect and emotional intimacy forming, a bridge I knew would carry us into something far more profound. The tension that had quietly built between us over the past days seemed to reach a delicate, almost tangible peak one late evening in the office. The hum of the air conditioning, the faint clicking of keys from the empty office beyond, and the muted glow of the desk lamp all combined to create an atmosphere of intimate isolation. I was reviewing some reports when she appeared beside me, her presence immediately drawing my attention. There was a softness to her expression tonight, a quiet openness that contrasted with the poised authority she carried during the day. We worked side by side, shoulders brushing lightly as we leaned over the same documents. It was a small, seemingly trivial act, yet each contact carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I was aware of her subtle warmth, the faint scent of her perfume, and the natural rhythm of her breathing. It was the kind of closeness that didn't need words. It spoke in the language of small gestures, fleeting touches, and lingering glances. At one point, our hands both reached for a pen. The brief brush of fingers sent a shock of awareness through me. I hesitated, not pulling away immediately, caught in the moment where professional boundaries blurred with something deeper. Her eyes met mine, steady and calm, yet there was a flicker of acknowledgement, an unspoken understanding of the tension that had been quietly growing between us. "You know," she said softly, leaning a little closer, "I've been thinking about how complicated this all could be. And yet, somehow, it feels natural to be here, like this." Her voice carried warmth, intimacy, and honesty that made my chest tighten. I swallowed, nodding, realizing that I felt the same, that every shared glance, every accidental touch had been leading us here. As the conversation continued, we moved closer, drawn by a magnetic pull that felt both thrilling and comforting. Her hand rested lightly near mine on the edge of the desk, our proximity charged with subtle tension. The lamp cast a soft glow over her face, highlighting the gentle curve of her smile, the way her eyes crinkled slightly when she laughed at something I said. It was a quiet, human moment, yet it felt monumental in the context of everything that had passed. I felt the impulse to bridge the gap further, to offer a reassuring touch, and I did. My fingers brushed hers again, lingering just slightly longer this time. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let the contact remain, her presence calm, grounded, and intimate. There was no rush, no dramatic gesture, only the slow, steady acknowledgement that our connection had deepened. We paused, allowing the silence to speak. The world outside the office seemed to dissolve, leaving only the warmth between us, the subtle heartbeat of mutual understanding, and the quiet tension of unspoken desire. In that stillness, I realized that we had crossed from curiosity and admiration into something far more profound, an emotional closeness that felt real, tangible, and entirely mutual. As the evening drew on, we straightened papers, packed up, and prepared to leave. There was no overt declaration, no dramatic scene. Only a final lingering glance, a subtle brush of hands as we passed each other, and the unspoken promise that this was just the beginning of a slow, deliberate, and meaningful journey together. The office had emptied completely, leaving only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the quiet echo of our footsteps. Outside, the sun had begun its slow descent, painting the city skyline with muted golds and pinks. We stood side by side, gathering our belongings, and for the first time, the weight of all the moments we had shared pressed gently but insistently against me. Every glance, every touch, every unspoken word lingered in the space between us, as though the office itself held its breath, waiting for what came next. As we walked toward the elevator, our shoulders brushed lightly. The contact was small, accidental in appearance, yet it carried the warmth and familiarity that had been quietly building over weeks. I felt the subtle rhythm of her movement beside me, the ease in which she navigated the familiar space, and the gentle, natural grace that seemed to radiate from her even in mundane moments. "I'm glad we had this time," she said softly, her voice just above the hum of the building. There was no grand declaration in her tone, only quiet sincerity. I noticed the way her eyes caught the soft light from the windows, shimmering with a warmth that matched the subtle smile on her lips. I wanted to say something, anything that could capture the depth of the emotions stirring inside me, but words felt insufficient. Instead, I simply nodded, my gaze meeting hers, lingering just long enough to convey understanding, respect, and a shared acknowledgement of everything between us. When the elevator doors opened, the city lights spilled in, bathing the space in gentle luminescence. We stepped inside together, and for a brief moment, our hands brushed again, lighter than air, yet heavy with meaning. It wasn't a bold gesture. There was no urgency, no rush, only the quiet intimacy that had defined our connection from the very beginning. As we descended, the hum of the elevator became a private rhythm, a soundtrack to our shared thoughts. I noticed the subtle warmth radiating from her hand as it passed near mine, the steady cadence of her breathing, and the gentle curve of her smile whenever our eyes met. In these small, delicate moments, I realized that the tension, hesitation, and curiosity of the past weeks had transformed into a steady, comforting presence, a connection that neither of us could fully articulate, yet both understood deeply. When we stepped out onto the street, a soft evening breeze carried the scent of the city, mingling with the faint trace of her perfume. We walked side by side, close enough to feel each other's presence, but far enough to maintain comfort, a delicate balance that felt natural. Every step, every glance, every subtle brush of hands reinforced the unspoken promise between us, a promise of patience, understanding, and slow, steady closeness. As we reached the corner where our paths diverged, she paused, offering a gentle, lingering smile. I met it with one of my own, a quiet reflection of everything we had shared and all that was yet to come. Our hands brushed once more, soft and deliberate, before we parted. And in that simple, warm moment, I understood that the story wasn't about dramatic gestures or sudden declarations. It was about connection, trust, and the steady unfolding of emotion. A slow-burn journey that had begun with a private word and would continue, quietly, profoundly, and beautifully, beyond the walls of the office.